The conference room on the 47th floor of Meridian Financial had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over downtown Chicago. Richard Thompson sat at the polished mahogany table, adjusting his gold cufflinks as he reviewed quarterly reports. At 58, he carried himself like a man who'd earned his corner office through decades of climbing the corporate ladder. His navy suit was pressed to perfection, his silver hair styled just so, and his voice commanded attention whenever he spoke during board meetings. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. What Richard didn't know was that the 26-year-old woman sitting across from him in jeans and a Target sweater owned 43% of the company he'd devoted his entire career to. But we'll get to that. My name is Emma Thompson, and this is the story of how my father's biggest mistake became my greatest opportunity. Growing up in Naperville, Illinois, our house was nice enough, 4 bedrooms, 2-car garage, manicured lawn that my dad obsessed over every weekend. Richard Thompson worked 60-hour weeks as senior vice president of operations at Meridian Financial, a mid-sized investment firm that managed pension funds and corporate portfolios. He'd started there right out of Northwestern University, worked his way up from junior analyst to department head over 25 years. Every morning at 6:15 sharp, he'd leave the house in his pressed shirt and conservative tie, briefcase in one hand, travel mug of black coffee in the other. He lived for that job, lived for the respect he commanded in meetings, the way junior employees would straighten up when he walked past their cubicles, the annual performance reviews, where he'd dispense wisdom about building a career that matters. My mother, Susan, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. She was the type of woman who baked cookies for every school fundraiser, organized neighborhood block parties, and somehow managed to make our house feel warm despite my father's constant stress about quarterly earnings and market volatility. She never complained about Richard's long hours or weekend conference calls, just smiled and kept the family running. I was their only child, and from the time I could walk, Richard had grand plans for my future. Emma's going to be something special, he'd tell his colleagues at company barbecues. Straight A's, captain of the debate team, full scholarship to wherever she wants to go. She's got the Thompson drive. And I did have good grades. I worked hard, studied late, and participated in every academic competition I could find. But I also had something else. A fascination with numbers that went beyond what my high school business classes could teach me. While other kids spent their free time on social media or at the mall, I was reading financial reports, studying market trends, learning about investment strategies from library books and online courses. When I was 16, I convinced my mom to let me open a small investment account with money I'd saved from babysitting and tutoring. Just $500 to start. Richard thought it was cute, his little girl playing with pretend business. He even offered to help me pick some safe, reliable stocks that wouldn't teach me any bad habits. I politely declined his help. Instead, I spent weeks researching small-cap technology companies, reading quarterly reports until my eyes burned, analyzing growth patterns that the big firms overlooked. I bought shares in 3 companies that everyone said were too risky for a teenager. Within 6 months, my $500 had grown to $800. By my senior year of high school, that account was worth over $3,000. Richard was impressed but not surprised. She's got good instincts, he'd tell people. Runs in the family. What he didn't know was that I'd also started a small consulting business, helping local entrepreneurs analyze their financial projections and business plans. Nothing fancy, just me, my laptop, and a hunger to understand how businesses really worked from the ground up. I charged $50 for a basic financial review, $200 for a comprehensive business analysis. It wasn't much, but it was mine. College was supposed to be the next step in Richard's plan for my life. Northwestern University, just like him. Business degree, maybe finance or economics. Then a respectable entry-level position at a reputable firm, working my way up the same ladder he'd climbed. But I had different ideas. I chose DePaul University instead. Smaller, less prestigious, but with a business program that let me focus on entrepreneurship and emerging market. Richard was disappointed but figured it was just a phase. She'll transfer to Northwestern next year, he told people, once she realizes what really matters for building a serious career. I didn't transfer. Instead, I threw myself into every aspect of business I could learn: accounting, marketing, operations management, international finance. I took summer classes, attended evening seminars, networked with professors who worked in venture capital and private equity. By my junior year, my little consulting business had grown into something more substantial. I'd incorporated Thomson Strategic Consulting, built a client base of over 40 small businesses, and was pulling in enough revenue to pay for college without touching my parents' savings. I kept the business quiet though. Richard thought I was just doing well with my studies, and maybe helping a few classmates with their homework for extra spending money. The truth was more complicated. While my father climbed the corporate ladder at Meridian Financial, I was learning how to build my own ladder. I studied companies like his from the outside, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses, understanding how mid-sized firms operated, where they succeeded, and where they consistently failed to adapt to changing market. Meridian Financial, for all its prestige and my father's loyalty, was exactly the kind of company I found most interesting. Established enough to have significant assets, but bureaucratic enough to miss major opportunity. They managed over $2 billion in client funds, but their investment strategies hadn't evolved much since the 1990s. They were profitable, stable, and slowly becoming irrelevant. I never told Richard any of this. During our family dinners, I'd listen to him complain about young employees who don't understand how business really works, and startup companies with no staying power. I'd nod and ask questions that made him feel like the wise mentor he believed himself to be. Meanwhile, I was quietly building relationships with investors who understood exactly how business really worked in the 20s. By my senior year of college, Thomson Strategic Consulting was managing investment portfolios for 12 clients, had facilitated 3 successful business acquisitions, and was generating more annual revenue than my father's salary at Meridian. I lived in a modest apartment near campus, drove a used Honda Civic, and wore clothes from discount retailers. Richard thought I was struggling financially. "College is expensive," he'd say, slipping me $100 bill when I visited home. "Don't be too proud to ask for help if you need it." I never needed it, but I never corrected his assumptions either. The real transformation happened during my final semester. One of my consulting clients, a venture capital firm called Apex Holdings, offered me something I hadn't expected: a partnership opportunity. They'd been impressed with my analysis of their portfolio companies, and wanted to bring me on as a junior partner with the potential to lead acquisitions in the financial services sector. The offer came with a 6-figure salary, equity stakes in future deals, and access to investment capital that would have made my father's head spin. But more importantly, it came with something I'd been working toward without fully realizing it: the power to make the kind of strategic decisions that could reshape entire companies. I accepted the offer 3 weeks before graduation. Richard and Susan came to the ceremony, proud and excited about what they imagined came next. Richard had already reached out to contacts at several Chicago firms, ready to help me get my foot in the door somewhere respectable. He'd prepared a whole speech about the importance of starting at the bottom and earning respect through hard work and dedication. After the graduation dinner, as we sat in the restaurant parking lot, he asked about my plans. "I'm starting a new job next month," I told him. "Excellent. Which firm?" "Apex Holdings." He frowned. "Never heard of them. What do they do?" "Private equity, venture capital, business acquisitions." Richard laughed. "Emma, those places don't hire fresh college graduates. They want people with experience, proven track record." "Are you sure you're not thinking of some kind of entry-level analyst position?" I didn't correct him. I just smiled and said we'd see how it worked out. What Richard didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that I'd spent 4 years building exactly the kind of proven track record that firms like Apex Holdings valued most. I demonstrated an ability to identify undervalued opportunities, execute strategic improvements, and generate returns that impressed even seasoned investors. I'd also developed a particular interest in a specific type of acquisition target: established financial services firms with solid client bases, but outdated management structures. Companies that could be dramatically improved with the right kind of leadership and strategic vision. Companies exactly like Meridian Financial, The first family gathering where my new reality became clear happened 6 months after I started at Apex Holding. It was Thanksgiving at my Aunt Carol's house in Oak Brook, the annual Thompson family tradition that brought together my father's side of the family for an afternoon of football, turkey and thinly veiled competition. My cousin Bradley had just finished his MBA at Kellogg and landed a position at Goldman Sachs in New York. He spent the entire appetizer hour talking about his signing bonus, his Manhattan apartment, and the deals he was working. Bradley was 3 years older than me, had always been Richard's favorite nephew, and carried himself like someone destined for corner offices and country club memberships. The financial sector is really where the serious money is made, Bradley announced, adjusting his expensive watch. You have to understand global markets, complex derivatives, and institutional client relationships. It's not for everyone. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Richard beamed with pride. Bradley's always had that killer instinct. Reminds me of myself at that age. When the conversation turned to me, the tone shifted noticeably. So Emma, what exactly are you doing these days? Asked my Uncle Jim, Carol's husband who owned a chain of auto parts stores. I work for an investment firm, I said simply. Bradley laughed. What kind of investment firm? Like helping people with their 401ks. Private equity and venture capital. Really? Bradley's eyebrows shot up. Which firm? I know most of the major players in Chicago. Apex Holdings. A moment of silence. Bradley pulled out his phone, presumably to Google the company. Richard looked confused. I've never heard of them, Richard said. Are they new? They've been around for about 8 years, I replied. What's your role there? Carol asked, clearly trying to be supportive. I'm a junior partner, Bradley snorted. Junior partner? Emma, companies don't make college graduates partners. Maybe you mean junior analyst or associate. I could have corrected him. I could have explained that my partnership agreement included equity stakes in 7 different portfolio companies, or that my compensation package that year would exceed his Goldman Sachs salary by a significant margin. Instead, I just smiled and said, it's a smaller firm. They do things differently. Richard patted my shoulder in what he probably thought was an encouraging way. Well, it sounds like a good starting point. You'll learn the basics, get some experience, and then you can move on to something more substantial. The pattern was set that day. Every family gathering, every phone call, every casual conversation reinforced the same narrative. Emma was trying her best, but she wasn't quite operating at the level of serious professionals like Bradley or Richard. Christmas dinner brought more of the same. Bradley had moved to a bigger apartment in Tribeca. He was working on a merger between 2 pharmaceutical companies, traveling to London and Frankfurt, making the kind of deals that got written up in the Wall Street Journal. The key is building relationships with the right people, he explained to the table. You need access to decision makers, people who can move hundreds of millions of dollars with a phone call. Richard nodded sagely. That's exactly right. It's about credibility, reputation, proving you belong in those rooms. When someone asked about my work, I mentioned that we'd recently closed on acquiring a manufacturing company in Wisconsin. How big? Bradley asked. About $40 million in annual revenue. That's cute, he said, not unkindly. We're working on deals worth 10 times that. But hey, everyone starts somewhere. What I didn't mention was that the Wisconsin acquisition was my deal. I'd identified the target company, analyzed their operations, negotiated the purchase price, and would be overseeing the restructuring process that was projected to triple their profitability within 18 months. My commission from that single deal was more than Bradley's annual salary, but I let them think what they wanted to think. The dismissal wasn't always intentional. At my cousin Sarah's wedding in June, I sat at the family table wearing a dress I'd bought at Nordstrom Rack, listening to conversations about vacation homes and private school tuition. Sarah's new husband worked in commercial real estate. Her brother was a surgeon. Bradley brought his girlfriend, who worked at McKinsey and spoke fluent Mandarin. Emma's in finance too, Sarah told her new in-laws, trying to include me in the conversation. Oh, wonderful. Which bank? Asked the groom's mother. She's not at a bank, Richard clarified. She works for a small investment group, more of a consulting type situation. The woman smiled politely and immediately turned her attention to Bradley, who was happy to discuss his latest trip to Hong Kong and the challenges of managing cross-border transactions. I excused myself to get some air and found myself standing on the hotel balcony, looking out over Lake Michigan. My phone buzzed with an email from my assistant at Apex. 3 new acquisition targets had been identified, including a financial services firm in Minneapolis that managed pension funds for municipal employees. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family discussed my modest career prospects, I was reviewing opportunities to purchase companies that generated more revenue in a month than most of them would see in their entire careers. The pattern extended beyond family gatherings. When I visited my parents' house, Richard would leave investment magazines on the coffee table, thinking they might help me understand how real finance works. He'd explain basic concepts like market capitalization and price-to-earnings ratios, assuming I needed the education. The key to success in finance, he told me one Sunday afternoon, is understanding that it's all about relationships and reputation. You can't just show up with good ideas. You need credibility, a track record, the right connection. I nodded and asked thoughtful questions, playing the role of the eager student. Meanwhile, my phone contained contact information for portfolio managers overseeing billions in assets, venture capitalists who'd funded some of the most successful startups of the past decade, and acquisition specialists who could structure deals that most people couldn't even comprehend. By my second year at Apex, the cognitive dissonance had become almost amusing. I was leading due diligence on a potential acquisition of a regional bank in Indiana, traveling to board meetings in Dallas and Denver, reviewing financial statements that required security clearances to access. But when I came home for my birthday dinner, my parents gave me a gift card to Banana Republic, so you can buy some nice clothes for work interviews. You know, Emma, Richard said over the birthday cake, I've been thinking, maybe it's time you started looking for something more stable. These startup investment firms come and go. You need to think about building a real career. I thanked him for the advice and promised I'd consider it. What I was actually considering was whether Meridian Financial would make a good acquisition target. I'd been quietly analyzing their operations for months, studying their client retention rates, their fee structures, and their operational efficiency metrics. They were exactly the kind of company that Apex specialized in acquiring: solid fundamentals, loyal client base, but management that was too comfortable and conservative to maximize their potential. The analysis had started as idle curiosity, a way to understand my father's professional world, but the more I learned, the more I realized that Meridian was practically begging to be acquired by someone with vision and capital. They hadn't updated their technology infrastructure in 6 years. Their investment strategies were generating returns that consistently lagged market benchmarks. They were losing younger clients to more innovative firms and hadn't developed any digital service offerings. Their operational costs were inflated by layers of middle management that added little value. Most tellingly, their senior leadership, including my father, seemed completely unaware of how vulnerable they'd become. They were proud of their stability and tradition, completely blind to the fact that stability without growth was just a slower form of decline. I started compiling a preliminary acquisition analysis, just as an intellectual exercise: market valuation, potential restructuring scenarios, projected return on investment. The numbers were compelling. Meridian could be transformed into a highly profitable modern financial services firm with the right strategic approach. But that was just theoretical. A thought experiment to see if I could identify the same opportunities that made Apex successful. I certainly wasn't planning to actually acquire my father's company. Not yet. Anyway, the call came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was in my office at Apex, reviewing financial projections for a potential acquisition of a credit union in Michigan, when my phone rang. It was my mother, and I could hear the strain in her voice immediately. Emma, honey, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. My stomach dropped. What's wrong, Mom? Your father? He's been acting strange lately. Stressed about money in a way I haven't seen since you were little. He keeps talking about having to help you out, says you're probably struggling but too proud to ask for help. I set down my pen and closed the laptop. Mom, I'm fine, really. I know you say that, but he's convinced you're barely getting by. He's been working extra hours, talking about dipping into our retirement savings to help you with rent or student loans or whatever you might need. The irony was suffocating. While my father was losing sleep over my imaginary financial struggles, I was sitting in an office where my decisions affected millions of dollars in investments. That week alone, I'd approved funding for 2 startup acquisitions and was finalizing terms on a deal that would generate more profit than his annual salary. Mom, you need to tell him to stop worrying. I'm doing better than he thinks. He won't listen to me about this. You know how he gets about family responsibility, especially when it comes to you. He thinks because you're not at some big-name firm like Bradley, you must be having a hard time. After we hung up, I stared out the window at the Chicago skyline, watching office lights flicker on as evening settled over the city. The weight of the deception I'd been maintaining felt heavier than usual. I'd let my family believe I was struggling because it seemed easier than explaining the truth, but now their assumptions were causing real stress. I decided it was time to set the record straight. The opportunity came 3 weeks later, at my cousin Rachel's baby shower. The whole Thompson clan gathered at a country club in Wheaton, the kind of place with golf course views and waitstaff who called everyone sir and ma'am. Bradley was there with his fiancée, fresh off a promotion to vice president at Goldman. My father wore his best suit and the confident smile of a man who belonged in rooms like this. During lunch, the conversation turned to career updates and future plans. Bradley dominated the discussion, describing his latest deal involving a pharmaceutical merger worth $800 million. The complexity is incredible, he explained to the table. You're coordinating with regulatory agencies in 3 different countries, managing currency exchange risks, conducting due diligence on intellectual property portfolios. It's the kind of work that really separates the professionals from the amateurs. Richard nodded approvingly. That's what real success looks like. Taking on responsibility for deals that actually matter. Working with serious money. Bradley's fiancée, Jessica, worked at a prestigious law firm downtown. She described her work on corporate litigation cases, the late nights, the high-stakes negotiations that could determine the fate of entire companies. It's exhausting, she said, but when you're handling cases worth hundreds of millions, you know your work has real impact. The conversation naturally turned to me. So, Emma, said my Aunt Carol, how are things going at your little investment company? The phrase little investment company hit like a slap. I'd been hearing variations of it for 2 years, but this time something was different. Maybe it was knowing that my father was working overtime because he thought I needed financial help. Maybe it was sitting in a room full of people who assumed I was the family underachiever while I was actually outperforming all of them combined. Things are going well, I said carefully. What kind of deals are you working on these days? Bradley asked, with the tone of someone humoring a child's hobby. We recently closed on acquiring a financial services firm in Minnesota. $68 million in annual revenue. Bradley nodded condescendingly. That's a decent-sized regional player. What was your role in the deal? I led the acquisition. A moment of silence around the table. Bradley smiled like I'd said something amusing. Emma, when you say led, do you mean you helped with research? Assisted with due diligence? Because leading an acquisition of that size would require someone with extensive experience and significant authority within the firm. I felt my jaw tighten. I mean, I identified the target, conducted the financial analysis, negotiated the purchase terms, and structured the financing. Richard laughed, not unkindly, but in the way you might laugh at a child who claimed to have driven the family car. Sweetheart, those kinds of responsibilities don't get handed to junior employees. You might have been part of a team that worked on those things. Dad. Emma, I've been in finance for 25 years. he continued. I know how these firms operate. They don't let inexperienced people make decisions about $60 million deals. That's serious money. Serious responsibility. Bradley leaned forward. What firm did you say you work for again? Apex Holdings. He pulled out his phone. I'm going to look them up. I know most of the major players in private equity, but I've never heard of them. I watched him scroll through Google results, his expression shifting from curious to confused to something approaching concern. Emma, he said slowly, this company, they're not in any of the industry directories I know. They don't have a public website. Are you sure about the name? I'm sure. Richard was starting to look worried. Honey, are you certain this is a legitimate company? Because there are scams that target young people, make them think they're working in finance when they're really just... It's not a scam, Dad. Well then, why can't we find any information about them? Bradley pressed. Legitimate investment firms have public profiles, regulatory filings, industry recognition. This looks like... I don't know what this looks like. The table had gone quiet. Family members were exchanging glances, clearly thinking I'd been taken advantage of by some kind of financial fraud scheme. My mother looked genuinely frightened. Emma, Richard said gently, how much money have you given these people? Because if someone convinced you to invest your savings in exchange for a fake job, I haven't given them any money, Dad. They pay me. How much? Bradley asked bluntly. I hesitated. The truth was that my total compensation that year, including profit sharing and equity stakes, would exceed $400,000, but saying that would sound like a lie. Enough to live comfortably. Richard shook his head. Emma, I think you've been taken advantage of. These people, whoever they are, they've convinced you that you're some kind of investment executive, but real firms don't operate in secret. Real deals don't get handled by recent college graduates. Dad, listen to me, he said, his voice taking on the firm tone he used when he was absolutely certain he was right. I've worked my whole career to understand how legitimate finance operates. I know what real success looks like. And this isn't it. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. You're young. You're smart. You're ambitious. But you're also naive about how the world actually works. Someone has been filling your head with fantasies about leading acquisitions and managing millions of dollars, and they're probably using you for something. The patronizing kindness in his voice was worse than outright dismissal. He genuinely believed he was protecting me from my own gullibility. I think, he continued, it's time you came home, got some distance from whatever situation you've gotten yourself into, and let me help you find a real job. Something entry-level at a reputable firm where you can learn properly, build genuine experience. Bradley nodded. I could probably get you an interview for an analyst position at Goldman. The starting salary would be around $60,000, but it's legitimate work with real career prospects. The entire table was looking at me with a mixture of pity and concern. These people, my family, had convinced themselves that I was either lying, deluded, or being scammed. The idea that I might actually be successful was literally inconceivable to them. That's when my father said the words that changed everything. Emma, I need you to understand something. Success isn't about pretending to be something you're not. It's about accepting reality, working hard and building something real over time. He paused, looked directly into my eyes, and delivered the line that would haunt him forever. Right now, you're poor. You're poor in experience, poor in connections, poor in understanding how the world actually works. And until you accept that, you'll never be anything else. The words hung in the air like smoke. Poor. He'd called me poor in front of the entire family, not referring to money, but to something worse. My worth, my competence, my understanding of reality itself. I looked around the table at faces full of sympathy and certainty. They all agreed with him. Poor little Emma, living in a fantasy, too proud to accept help, too naive to recognize she was being taken advantage of. That's when I made the decision that would change all of our lives forever. I was done being underestimated. The Monday morning after the baby shower, I walked into my office at Apex with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. My assistant, Marcus Chen, was already at his desk with my coffee and the morning briefing materials. "How was the family event?" he asked, noting what must have been an unusually determined expression on my face. "Educational," I replied. "Marcus, I need you to pull together everything we have on Meridian Financial, full analysis, operations, management structure, financial performance, market position, everything." He raised an eyebrow. "The firm where your father works?" "That's the one. Are we considering them as an acquisition target?" I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. "We're considering a lot of things. What my family didn't understand about Apex Holdings was that we were deliberately invisible. David Kellerman, our founder and managing partner, had built the firm on a philosophy of strategic stealth. We didn't advertise, didn't seek press coverage, didn't maintain flashy offices or public websites. Our clients found us through referrals. Our deals were structured to avoid regulatory disclosure requirements whenever possible, and our success was measured in returns, not recognition. "Visibility is expensive," David often said. "It attracts competition, regulation, and people who want to take credit for your work. Better to be unknown and effective than famous and hamstrung." This approach has allowed us to operate with unusual freedom. While firms like Goldman Sachs had every move scrutinized by regulators and journalists, Apex could identify opportunities, move quickly, and restructure companies without the circus that typically surrounded major acquisitions. In my 3 years there, I'd learned to think like David, strategically, patiently, and always several moves ahead of the obvious play. By Wednesday, Marcus had compiled a comprehensive file on Meridian Financial. The picture that emerged was exactly what I'd suspected: a fundamentally sound company being slowly strangled by outdated thinking and risk-averse management. Meridian managed $2.3 billion in client assets, primarily pension funds and conservative investment portfolios for individuals nearing retirement. They had 257 clients, ranging from small municipal governments to mid-sized corporations looking for steady, reliable returns. Their client retention rate was an impressive 94%, meaning people who chose Meridian tended to stay with them for decades. The problem was growth, or rather the complete lack of it. For the past 5 years, Meridian's client base had remained essentially flat. They weren't losing customers, but they weren't gaining them either. Their investment returns consistently lagged market benchmarks by 1.2 to 1.8 percentage points. Not catastrophically, but enough to make them unattractive to sophisticated investors. Their fee structure hadn't been updated since 2011. Their technology infrastructure was built on systems from the early 2000s, and their marketing consisted primarily of golf outings and dinner events for existing clients. Most critically, their leadership team was systematically resistant to change. The executive committee, which included my father, had an average age of 57 and an average tenure with the company of 19 years. They were comfortable, cautious, and completely blind to the threats facing their industry. "They're the perfect target," Marcus observed, reviewing the financial projections I'd created. "Solid fundamentals, loyal customer base, but managed by people who think it's still 1995. I nodded, studying the organizational chart that showed my father's position in the hierarchy. Senior Vice President of Operations, reporting directly to the CEO, responsible for day-to-day management of client services and administrative functions. He was influential enough to shape company policy, but not senior enough to have equity stakes or golden parachute protections. "What's our acquisition timeline looking like?" I asked. Marcus consulted his tablet. "The Michigan Credit Union deal closes next month. The pharmaceutical distributor in Ohio is pending regulatory approval, probably 6 weeks out. The restaurant chain acquisition is on hold until their accounting irregularities get resolved. So we have bandwidth for a new project. Theoretically, yes, but Meridian would be our largest acquisition to date. We'd need to bring in additional capital partners, probably structure it as a leveraged buyout to make the numbers work." I was already thinking through the logistics. Meridian's market valuation was approximately $180 million based on industry standards and their asset management volume. With the right financing structure, Apex could acquire a controlling interest for around $95 million in cash, with the remainder funded through strategic debt arrangements. More importantly, I knew exactly how to unlock Meridian's potential once we owned it. The first step would be upgrading their technology infrastructure, modern portfolio management software, automated reporting systems, digital client interfaces that would appeal to younger investors. The second step would be diversifying their service offerings beyond conservative mutual funds and government bonds. The third step would be replacing senior management with people who understood that financial services in 2023 required innovation, not just stability. Within 2 years, I was confident we could double Meridian's client base and triple their profitability. The question was whether I wanted to acquire my father's company for business reasons or for personal ones. I decided to test the waters before committing to either. That evening, I called my parents. My mother answered, and we chatted about normal things, her students, the weather, a book she was reading. When my father got on the line, I brought up work. Dad, I've been thinking about what you said at the baby shower, about understanding how real finance works. I'm glad to hear that, Emma. I was hoping you'd come around. I was wondering if you might be willing to meet me for lunch sometime this week. Maybe you could tell me more about how Meridian operates. What makes a financial services firm successful? A pause. I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. Of course, sweetheart. I'd be happy to help you understand the industry better. How about Thursday? There's a nice restaurant near my office. Perfect. Emma, I'm really proud of you for being open to learning. It takes maturity to recognize when you need guidance. Thursday arrived gray and rainy, typical March weather in Chicago. I met my father at Rosewood Grill, an upscale steakhouse popular with the Meridian crowd. He was already seated when I arrived, reading financial news on his tablet, looking every inch the successful executive in his navy suit and gold tie clip. You look nice, he said as I sat down. I was wearing a charcoal blazer and slacks, professional but not expensive. Thanks. I thought I should dress appropriately for learning about serious business. He chuckled. That's the right attitude. Over appetizers, he began explaining Meridian's business model, with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved his work. He described their client relationships, their investment philosophy, their commitment to stability and consistent returns. The key, he said, is understanding that most people don't want dramatic gains or losses. They want steady growth, reliable service, and the confidence that their money is being managed by people who know what they're doing. I nodded, asking questions that demonstrated both ignorance and genuine interest. How did they acquire new clients? What were their biggest operational challenges? How did they differentiate themselves from competitors? Competition is actually our biggest concern right now, he admitted. These new online investment platforms, robo-advisors, cryptocurrency firms, they promise higher returns, lower fees, more exciting opportunities. They're attracting younger investors who don't understand the value of experience and proven track records. How is Meridian responding to that? Richard sighed. Slowly. The executive committee is divided on how much we should change our approach. Some people think we need to modernize our technology, expand our service offerings. Others believe our traditional methods are what make us successful, and changing too much would compromise our core strengths. What do you think? I think we need to be careful. Change for the sake of change is dangerous. We've built something solid over decades, and you don't throw that away chasing trends. I sensed an opening. But what if you could modernize without compromising your core strengths? Use technology to serve clients better, attract new customers while keeping existing ones happy. He looked at me with surprise and something approaching respect. That's actually a very insightful question. Emma, you're thinking like a business person. I've been paying attention. The challenge is execution. Change requires capital, expertise, and leadership willing to take calculated risks. Meridian has been successful precisely because we're conservative. but that conservatism might be holding us back now. I leaned forward. What would it take to make those changes? Hypothetically, new management, for one thing. People with vision and experience implementing technological transformation, significant investment in systems and infrastructure, a strategic plan that balances innovation with stability. He paused, studying my face. Why are you asking about this? Just trying to understand how business really works. Like you said, but I could see him processing something, perhaps noticing that my questions were more sophisticated than he'd expected from someone he considered naive about finance. Emma, he said slowly, how much do you actually know about investment management? I smiled. More than you think. The seed was planted. For the first time, my father was questioning his assumptions about my capabilities. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued the education process. I sent him articles about emerging trends in financial services, asked thoughtful questions about Meridian's competitive position, and gradually demonstrated a level of business acumen that didn't match his mental picture of his struggling daughter. Meanwhile, Marcus was quietly assembling the financial structure for a potential Meridian acquisition. We identified 3 capital partners willing to co-invest, established preliminary terms with our preferred legal team, and created a timeline that could take us from initial offer to completed acquisition in approximately 4 months. All we needed was the right moment to make our move. That moment came sooner than I expected. The acquisition moved faster than anyone anticipated. Within 6 weeks of that lunch with my father, Apex Holdings had secured financing commitments from 3 institutional investors, completed due diligence through a network of independent auditors, and submitted a formal purchase offer to Meridian Financial's board of directors. The offer was straightforward, $19.5 million for complete ownership of the company, with guarantees of employment continuity for all current staff and a commitment to maintaining client relationships during the transition period. It was $15 million above market value, generous enough to be irresistible, but structured to close quickly before anyone could organize competing bids. Meridian's board accepted the offer in a closed-door meeting on a Friday afternoon in May. The deal would be announced the following Monday, with the acquisition scheduled to complete within 30 days pending regulatory approval. I spent that weekend preparing for the conversation that would change my relationship with my father forever. Monday morning, I arrived at Meridian Financial's offices at 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the all-hands meeting where employees would learn about the acquisition. The building was a modest 15-story structure in downtown Chicago, the kind of place that projected stability rather than innovation. I'd been there once before, years earlier when my father had given me a brief tour during college. Now I was walking through the lobby as the new owner. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than it should have. I wore my best suit, navy blue, tailored, the kind of outfit that communicated authority without ostentation. In my briefcase were documents that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of every person working in this building. The conference room was already filling when I arrived. Meridian's 57 employees were settling into chairs, chatting nervously about why management had called an emergency meeting. My father sat near the front, checking his phone, completely unaware that his life was about to be turned upside down. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Meridian's CEO, William Harrington, called for attention. Good morning, everyone. I've asked you all here to share some important news about the future of our company. He paused, scanning the room. As of Friday afternoon, Meridian Financial has been acquired by Apex Holdings, a private equity firm based here in Chicago. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Employees exchanged glances, some looking concerned, others curious. My father's expression was unreadable, but I could see him processing the implications. The new ownership has assured us that all current positions will be maintained during the transition, Harrington continued. They've also committed to significant investment in our technology infrastructure and service capabilities. He gestured toward the back of the room. I'd like to introduce Emma Thompson, who will be serving as managing director during the integration process. The room fell silent as I stood up. 56 pairs of eyes turned toward me, including my father's. For a moment nobody moved. Then, Recognition dawned on Richard's face. Not just that I was his daughter, but that I was here, in his workplace, being introduced as his new boss. Emma will be leading our modernization efforts, Harrington continued, either unaware of the family connection or choosing to ignore it. She brings extensive experience in financial services restructuring and has been instrumental in several successful corporate transformations. I walked to the front of the room, my heels clicking on the polished floor. When I reached the podium, I looked directly at my father before addressing the group. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I'm excited to work with all of you as we transform Meridian into a more competitive and innovative firm. My voice was steady, professional, completely at odds with the chaos I knew was erupting in my father's mind. Our first priority will be upgrading our technological capabilities to better serve existing clients and attract new ones. We'll be implementing new portfolio management systems, developing digital service platforms, and expanding our investment offerings beyond traditional products. I could see my father's hands gripping the edge of the table. We'll also be restructuring our operational procedures to improve efficiency and client responsiveness. This will involve some changes to current management protocols, but every employee will have opportunities to contribute to our new strategic direction. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes as I outlined our transformation timeline, answered questions about job security, and assured the staff that Meridian's core values would be preserved even as we modernized our approach. Throughout it all, my father sat motionless, staring at me like I was a stranger. When the meeting concluded, employees filed out in small groups, discussing what they'd just heard. My father remained in his seat until the room was nearly empty, then slowly approached the podium where I was gathering my materials. Emma, his voice was barely above a whisper. Hello, Dad. How long have you been planning this? I closed my briefcase and looked at him directly. The acquisition? About 2 months. But understanding this company well enough to improve it, that's taken considerably longer. You bought my company. Apex Holdings bought your company. I'm just the person they chose to run it. His face cycled through confusion, anger, and something that might have been respected. The firm you work for. Apex Holdings. You're not just an employee, are you? I'm a managing partner. I have been for over 2 years. Jesus Christ. Emma, do you understand what you've done? I set my briefcase on the table and faced him completely. I've acquired an underperforming financial services firm with significant untapped potential and excellent client relationships. I've secured employment for 57 people who might otherwise face layoffs if Meridian continued declining. I've positioned myself to modernize a company that was slowly becoming irrelevant. You've humiliated me. I've given you an opportunity to learn what real innovation looks like in financial services. His jaw tightened. My own daughter, buying my company like I'm some kind of failure. Dad, this isn't about you personally. It's about business. Meridian needed new leadership, and Apex Holdings needed a strategic acquisition in the financial services sector. The fact that you work here is incidental. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. The acquisition made perfect business sense, but I'd chosen this particular target, partly because I was tired of being underestimated by someone who didn't understand what I'd built. Incidental, he repeated. Emma, I've worked here for 25 years. I've built my entire career at this company, and you're telling me it's incidental that my own daughter just became my boss. What I'm telling you is that your career can continue and flourish under new management, if you're willing to adapt. Adapt to what? Taking orders from my child? Adapting to reality. The reality that financial services have changed, that client expectations have evolved, that companies need to innovate or become irrelevant. He stared at me for a long moment. You planned this. The lunch, the questions about Meridian's challenges, pretending to be interested in learning from me. You were gathering intelligence. I was trying to understand whether you could be part of the solution or if you'd insist on being part of the problem. And what's your conclusion? I picked up my briefcase. We'll find out. The transformation of Meridian Financial began immediately. Within the first week, Our technology consultants had assessed the existing systems and proposed a complete overhaul of the client management platform. Within 2 weeks, we'd hired 3 new portfolio managers specializing in emerging markets and alternative investments. Within a month, we'd launched a digital client portal that allowed real-time account monitoring and automated reporting. The changes weren't just technological. I restructured the management hierarchy, eliminating redundant middle management positions and creating direct reporting lines between senior executives and operational teams. The executive committee, which had operated by consensus and moved at the speed of caution, was replaced by a strategic planning team that met weekly and made decisions based on data rather than tradition. My father struggled with every change. During our first formal performance review, 6 weeks after the acquisition, I sat across from him in what had once been Harrington's office and reviewed his adaptation to the new operational procedures. "Your client satisfaction scores remain excellent," I told him. "Your team respects your experience and responds well to your leadership, but you're resisting the systematic changes we've implemented." "I'm trying to protect what works," he replied. "Not everything needs to be revolutionized just because it's been done the same way for a while." "Dad, client acquisition is up 37% since we launched the digital platform. Portfolio performance has improved across all risk categories. Average response time for client inquiries has dropped from 48 hours to 6 hours. These aren't changes for the sake of change, they're improvements." "And what happens when the technology fails? When do the algorithms make mistakes? When clients want to talk to actual human beings instead of chatbots? Then we'll handle those situations with the same professionalism we've always used. But we'll handle them more efficiently, with better information, and with tools that help us serve clients better." He leaned back in his chair. "You know what I think? I think you've been planning this revenge since you were a teenager. Poor little Emma, underestimated by her family, finally gets her chance to show everyone how smart she is." The accusation hung between us. Part of me wanted to deny it, but part of me knew he wasn't entirely wrong. "Maybe," I said. "But revenge that improves a company, protects jobs, and generates better returns for clients isn't really revenge. It's just good business that happens to prove a point." "What point is that?" "That success isn't about age, or experience, or tradition. It's about understanding reality and adapting to it." Over the following months, Meridian's transformation accelerated. We acquired 2 smaller investment firms, expanded our client base to include technology startups and renewable energy companies, and developed partnerships with online trading platforms that attracted younger investors. The financial results were undeniable. By the end of our first year under Apex ownership, Meridian's assets under management had grown from $2.3 billion to $3.8 billion. Client retention remained at 94%, but new client acquisition had increased by 180%. Our fee revenue had doubled, and our profit margins had tripled. More importantly, employee satisfaction had improved dramatically. The younger staff appreciated the new technology and expanded career opportunities. The veteran employees, including my father, grudgingly admitted that the changes had made their jobs easier and more rewarding. Richard never apologized for calling me poor, but he stopped questioning my decisions. He adapted to the new systems, worked effectively with the expanded team, and occasionally offered suggestions that demonstrated he was finally thinking innovatively about client service. 2 years after the acquisition, I stood in the same conference room where I'd first revealed my ownership of Meridian Financial. This time, the room was filled with reporters, industry analysts, and competitors who'd come to hear about our latest expansion. Meridian Financial had just acquired its 7th subsidiary company and launched a new division focused on sustainable investing. We managed over $6 billion in client assets, employed 200 people across 4 offices, and were recognized as one of the fastest-growing financial services firms in the Midwest. The press conference went smoothly. I answered questions about our growth strategy, our technology innovations, and our commitment to maintaining the client-focused approach that had always defined Meridian's culture. Afterward, as the room emptied, my father approached me near the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. "Emma," he said, I owe you an apology. I turned to face him. In the 2 years since the acquisition, he'd aged in some ways, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but he also seemed more energetic, more engaged with his work than I'd seen him in years. For what? For not seeing what you were capable of, for assuming that success had to look like what I was familiar with, for, he paused, for calling you poor when you were already building something I didn't understand. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I spent so much time worrying about whether you were living up to my expectations that I never asked what you were actually accomplishing. I was so invested in being right about how the world works that I couldn't see how the world was changing. We stood quietly for a moment, looking out at the city skyline. You know what's funny? He continued. I'm happier at work now than I've been in decades. The technology makes everything easier, the client relationships are more dynamic, and I'm learning things I never thought I'd need to know. You didn't just buy the company, you made it better. We made it better, I corrected. I couldn't have done this without people like you who understood the foundation we were building on. He smiled. So what's next? More acquisitions. Taking the company public. I shook my head. Actually, I'm thinking about stepping back. Meridian doesn't need me to run it anymore. It needs experienced professionals who understand both innovation and stability. You're leaving? I'm promoting. There's a senior vice president position opening up in our new sustainable investing division. It requires someone with deep client relationship experience and the flexibility to work with emerging investment strategies. His eyebrows rose. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you the opportunity to shape the future of financial services instead of just protecting its past. Richard looked out the window again, then back at me. What would you have done if I hadn't adapted? If I'd fought the changes or refused to work under new management, I'd have found you a position at one of our subsidiary firms where you could use your experience without blocking progress. But I'm glad we didn't have to do that. Because it would have been awkward? Because it would have been wasteful. Talent is talent, regardless of age or previous assumptions. The goal was never to get rid of anyone. It was to unlock everyone's potential. As we walked toward the elevator, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The family gatherings where I'd been dismissed, the assumptions about my capabilities, the moment when my father called me poor and triggered the chain of events that led to this transformation. I'd proven that success doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it builds quietly, steadily, until the moment when it becomes impossible to ignore. I've learned that the best revenge isn't defeating people who underestimate you, it's succeeding so thoroughly that they have to evolve in order to keep up. And most importantly, I'd discovered that changing people's minds isn't about proving them wrong. It's about creating new realities that make their old assumptions irrelevant. The elevator doors closed, and we descended together toward a future that neither of us had imagined when this story began. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.